Okay, so it's 4 o'clock, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. To start off, I want to show you guys because midterm reports just came out. So now your midterm evals, okay? So right now, exam 2 is not factored into your testing grade, right? Because it doesn't get added in until after remediation. Okay, so your midterm evals are based on your current testing and non-testing. But you can get a good estimate of what you need to do for like going forward if you go to the homepage on Brightspace. Okay, and then you're going to scroll down to the left here and you can see grade probability calculator. Okay, this thing is really good. So let's say on my first exam, I got a 60. Okay, so I got 30 out of 50 points. On my next exam, I did a little bit better. I studied more. I got a 90, so 45 points. Okay, what I can do is I can play around with exam 3. So say like, I'm pretty confident in this material, so I think I'll get an 86. Okay, so 43. Okay, and then we have 3 quizzes. So we have 3 quizzes for your PanOpen quizzes, right? So say I did okay on my PanOpen quizzes. I got an 80 on each of them. Okay, and I think I'll get an 80 on the last one. What this will do, if you scroll all the way down, it'll show you what you need to get on the final in order to pass. Okay, so you can mess around with this, knowing what your exam 1 and exam 2 scores are, as well as your PanOpen quiz 1 and 2. Okay, so you can mess around with this. So like, let's say I only get a 35, okay? Tells me I need to score a little higher on the final. Okay, let's say I got a 50% on both exam 1 and exam 2, but I end up bringing it up to an 80 for exam 3. Okay, it will tell me it is impossible for me to pass the final. Okay, so this will give you a good estimate of like how you need to get or how you need to score on future exams. So it'll tell you like, it'll give you a good estimate of what you need to score on exam 3 and how that'll impact what you need to score on your final. Okay, I am not allowed to tell you guys like whether or not you should withdraw. So I've been getting a lot of emails that are like, do you think I can pass? Do you think I can withdraw or should withdraw, whatever? I'm not allowed to tell you that. Okay, you have to gauge that the best you can for yourselves. I'm happy to sit down with you and go over like where you're losing points and whatnot, but as far as like your ability to pass the course, that's kind of got to be your own judgment. Okay, so we're going to start by finishing up chapter 11, and then we'll start on chapter 12. So just as like a refresher, let's do the cranial nerves questions to start off. Okay, let's do like 10 more seconds. Yeah, so the cranial nerve involved when you're smelling cologne, that is going to be your olfactory nerve. Okay. So olfactory nerve, olfaction, sense of smell. Cranial nerve number 2, optic nerve, that is going to be responsible for vision. Cranial nerve number 3, oculomotor. Oculo meaning eye, motor movement. Eye movement. Okay, cranial nerve number 11, or the accessory nerve or the spinal accessory nerve. This one is going to be responsible for shoulder shrugging. Okay. Ten more seconds. Yeah, so there are 12 cranial nerves. Okay. 12 pairs of cranial nerves. Sorry. Oh, right. I forgot. I think somebody in this section, or maybe it was my previous one, pointed out to me that like um the pairs are incorrect. It says how many cranial nerves are there, not how many pairs of cranial nerves are there. So let me upload this updated one really quick. Still loading, sorry. I don't know why it's taking so long. There we go. Okay. Something like that. Okay. So next we're going to be talking about the spinal cord. Okay. Now the spinal cord is going to be inside of those stacked vertebrae that we talked about back in like chapter 8, right? So if you remember, right, the shape of your vertebrae. So you have these two little wing things sticking off the back there, and then you have a dip, and then you have this big thick chunk here. Okay. This is going to be your vertebral body, this thick area here. That is made up of bone. Okay. So your spinal cord is actually going to run through this part back here where the like holes are. All right. So those are going to run through those vertebral foramen that we talked about. So the spinal cord is going to sit inside of those stacked vertebrae. Just like in the brain, we have gray matter and we have white matter. All right. Let me pull up the packet to make sure I'm following along. Okay. Just like in the brain, we have gray matter and we have white matter, okay? The difference between the brain and the spinal cord. Whereas in the brain, the gray matter makes up that outer region, that cortex, right? In the spinal cord, the gray matter is going to make up that inner part of the spinal cord, okay? And just like in the brain and the spinal cord, or sorry, just like in the brain, the white matter is going to appear white because of its abundance of myelin. Gray matter appears gray because of its lack of myelin. Okay. So I didn't have you guys fill anything out for those because we already talked a lot about them. Now, your spinal cord also needs to get all those nutrients. It needs to get rid of waste, just like your brain does, right? So you still need to have that cerebrospinal fluid. All right. So you have this thing called your central canal running through your spinal cord. So that central canal is going to run in the center here. Okay. Running through your spinal cord. That is going to carry the cerebrospinal fluid, the waste, all that stuff. All right. Now, those meninges, so that protective layer on the outside of the brain, okay? That protective layer that we have on the outside of the brain, it is going to continue down into the spinal cord. Okay? So we still have those meninges in the spinal cord, is what we're trying to say here. All right. So the difference is your epidural space in your brain, right? It's going to be mostly fluid and it's going to be pretty close to the skull. The epidural space in your spinal cord, on the other hand, is going to be like more of a fatty layer. So it's going to be a cushion of fat as opposed to like right against the skull. Okay. Now, looking at the structure of the spinal cord, okay, the spinal cord is literally just like a rope. Okay, so all of these threads are twisted together, super, super tight. So all of these nerves are twisted together on the spinal cord. Okay, all the way down to when you get to the first lumbar vertebrae. When you get to that first lumbar vertebrae, weird. Okay. Are they showing up now? Okay. Cool. So, you're welcome. I don't know why that was happening. So, the spinal cord is like a tight rope, okay, of all of these different nerves twisted together until you get down to about your L1 vertebrae. Okay, when you get down to your L1 vertebrae, what happens is those threads kind of loosen up, all right? And that bottom part of your spinal cord, it's something called your cauda equina. So it looks like a horse's tail, basically. Ah, that's not a highlighter. There we go. So cauda equina. So it looks like the horse's tail. So in veterinary practice, they use the terms rostral and caudal, rostral meaning nose, caudal meaning tail. So cauda means tail, equina, equine, horse's tail. Okay, it's just like a loose gathering at the base of the spinal cord. The rest of this stuff is all on another slide coming up. Now, coming off of your spinal column or spinal cord, okay, you have these things called spinal nerves. The spinal nerves are going to be responsible for relaying information from the spinal cord to the rest of the body. Okay. Make sure I'm getting everything. Now, you can have, so the important thing to know, all right, A nerve is different than a neuron. A neuron is going to be a single cell, right? So the neuron is going to have that cell body, that axon, the synapse, all of those different parts, okay? A nerve, on the other hand, is going to be a bunch of those cells bundled together, all right? So a nerve consists of many nerve fibers encased by connective tissue. So a lot of axons that are like wrapped around together. Now you can have just a few to a few million inside of a neuron, okay, or nerve, sorry. Now, nerves can be divided into 3 different types. You can have nerves that just carry sensory information. So those sensory nerves are bringing information towards the CNS, right? So if you remember, afferent, arrive, sensory nerves arrive, right? Then you have motor nerves. Motor nerves exit the central nervous system, right? They leave. So sensory nerves, only sensation, something like an optic nerve, right? That is only responsible for vision. That is having nothing to do with moving the eye, contracting the muscles in the eye, none of that. It only does vision. Motor neurons, on the other hand, they only do movement. So something like your oculomotor nerve has nothing to do with vision. Only thing that it does moves the eye. Most nerves, however, are going to have both sensory and motor. These are called mixed nerves. So they are going to both carry information towards the CNS as well as away from the CNS, aka towards the spinal cord as well as away from the spinal cord. Now it's important to note, once you get out of, once you leave the spinal cord, okay, these are called spinal nerves. The spinal nerves are part of your peripheral nervous system, right? Because we are outside of the brain and outside of the spinal cord. All right. Now you have 8 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, and 5 sacral. For the most part, these go along with the same number of vertebrae that we already had you guys remember. Okay. But the way that the spinal column is built. So if you have like your vertebrae like this, right? You are going to have nerves coming out above and below. So you have nerves here, one nerve here, one nerve here. In your cervical region, you have 7 cervical vertebrae and you have 8 cervical nerves because you have a nerve coming out both the top and the bottom of your C1 vertebrae. Okay? So in your cervical region, you have 8 cervical nerves. You are going to have 12 thoracic nerves, same number of thoracic vertebrae, 5 lumbar nerves, same number of lumbar vertebrae, 5 sacral, same number as the sacral vertebrae, and 1 coccygeal. Okay. Now, evolutionarily speaking, right? It doesn't make sense for your body to like have nerves coming off of your spinal cord, like in your upper body that are going to control things in your lower body, right? So the way that your body is designed, the way that it evolved, okay, these nerves kind of control things that are nearby to where they come off of. So for example, cervical nerves, they're going to control your upper body. So your chest, your head, your neck, your shoulders, and your arms and your hands. The exception to this, your phrenic nerve is going to control your diaphragm. We're going to talk about that more when we get to like chapter 18, I think, is respiratory system. Okay. So your diaphragm is a weird one. It's the only one that's like, excuse me, not like right by the nerves that innervate it. Okay. Next, you have thoracic nerves. Your thoracic nerves are going to innervate your thoracic cage. So it's going to be part of your intercostal muscles, your abdominal muscles, and your back muscles. Okay. Now, obviously, your spinal column does not extend all the way down your legs. So these kind of start spreading out that responsibility a little bit more. So your lumbar vertebrae are going to be the lower abdominal wall and parts of your thighs and legs. Okay. Your sacral vertebrae, so that bottommost part, well, almost the bottommost part, these are going to be innervating your thighs, your buttocks, your muscles of the skin and legs and feet, and your genital region. And lastly, you have your coccygeal nerve. There's only one. You guys remember the coccyx is like that teeny tiny little thing at the bottom there. So it makes sense that there's only one nerve. Okay, that is going to control your anal region. While you guys are answering this, I will be right back. My cat is scratching the door. Okay. Like 10 more seconds. Yeah, great job. So there are going to be 8 cervical spinal nerves. Okay, there are 7 cervical bones, 8 cervical spinal nerves. Now, talking about pain pathways, right? One of your biggest roles as an LPN is going to be helping in pain management. So, understanding the pain pathways is really important. This is a typo. This is not supposed to say emotion. It is supposed to say transmission. Okay? Transmission. So, for your pain pathways include signal, transmission, and perception. Ah. Sorry, I didn't realize my Diet Coke was blocking. So, for example, you put your hand on a stove, okay? You're going to have nerve endings in your skin that are going to tell you, hey, it's getting a little hot down here, okay? So they are going to pick up on that like burning sensation. That is that signal, okay? The next thing that's going to happen, it is going to transmit, so it is going to carry that signal up to your brain. Okay, so it is going to transmit that information, tell your brain, hey, we're burning. All right. Your brain then needs to perceive it. So once that signal gets sent to your brain needs to understand that signal. So it needs to be able to tell you, oh, I know what this means. It means our hand's on fire or burning, whatever. Okay. Now, when you talk about pain control, if you are interrupting one of these steps, it can control the pain pathway. So first one, reducing the signal. You can use like topical anesthetics. So something like lidocaine, okay? Lidocaine is like that gel that they put on your like gums when you go to the dentist before they put the like big needle in, right? So like lidocaine is a topical analgesic, okay? Or anesthetic. It's gonna make that area of your skin numb, okay? The next type of pain control, interrupting the transmission, okay? So something like opioids. Certain opioids can interrupt that transmission up to the brain. All right. So they cut it off so that the brain never gets the signal. Changing the brain's perception of that signal. I can't think of one off the top of my head, to be entirely honest, but basically it changes your brain's conscious perception of that pain. Now, a really common condition that you guys will come across is sciatica. Okay. Sciatica is going to be a pain radiating along what's called your sciatic nerve. Your sciatic nerve is the largest nerve in your body. It's going to come off. So remember, right? You have your spinal cord, which is a bundle of nerves. Coming off of your spinal cord, you have a bunch of spinal nerves. Okay. Now, your sciatic nerve, a bunch of nerves from your lumbar and your sacral region come off your spinal cord and they recombine to form this sciatic nerve. Okay. When the sciatic nerve comes out of your pelvis, there's like a structure that sticks up. Okay. And the sciatic nerve can kind of get caught on that projection. And when you compress the nerve, that can cause pain. So you can have this from a couple different reasons. You can have that herniated disc that we talked about. Okay. It can come from like something called your piriformis syndrome. What happens is there's this muscle called your piriformis muscle that wraps over where your sciatic nerve is. And if that gets like a muscle spasm or something, it can press on that sciatic nerve. Okay. When you get that sciatic nerve, your sciatic nerve has a bunch of different branches coming off of it. Okay, so you have like your femoral nerve, you have your saphenous nerve, you have your tibial nerve. Okay, you have a bunch of different nerves branching off your sciatic nerve. Okay, when you compress that sciatic nerve at the top, it's going to cause shooting pains all down your leg, right? Because they are all downstream from that sciatic nerve. So, a lot of key things that you guys are going to be doing: assessing pain location and severity, monitoring mobility and neurological changes, promoting comfort, so heating, positioning, educating patients on body mechanics and medication use, and reporting worsening symptoms that can indicate nerve damage. All right. Okay. So next we're going to talk about specific subdivisions of the peripheral nervous system. Okay. So starting with your somatic nervous system. Now, if you guys remember all the way back to chapter 10, right? We talked about skeletal muscle. I had you guys write down skeletal muscle is innervated by the somatic nervous system. Ta-da! Somatic nervous system. Okay. So your somatic nervous system is going to be a subdivision of your peripheral nervous system. So somatic nervous system has to do with skeletal muscle. First, we're going to talk about reflexes then. So reflexes are going to be quick, involuntary, predictable responses to a stimulus. Okay, make sure that I'm following. So what these are, they use something called a reflex arch. Sorry, a reflex arc. Okay. And what that reflex arc does, it bypasses your central nervous system so that you do not have like conscious perception of doing this muscle contraction. Okay, so this is why somebody only becomes aware of the reflex after it has occurred. Now, somatic reflexes specifically involve skeletal muscle. So these are talking about contraction of a skeletal muscle after it has been stimulated by a somatic neuron. Okay. This is going to be responsible for protecting the body against harm and maintaining posture. We're going to talk more about these in a second. Autonomic reflexes, on the other hand, these have to do with your autonomic nervous system, right? Automatic functions. So they involve secretion from glands or the contraction of smooth muscles. So for example, the dilation of the pupil. These are also called visceral reflexes because if you remember visceral, you're talking about organs, right? So looking at somatic reflexes to start. So for example, your knee jerk reflex, okay? So if the doctor takes a hammer and it taps, or they tap, it's called your patellar tendon, okay? So it's a tendon underneath your kneecap. When they tap that patellar tendon, what happens is your kneecap is going to be pulled down. When it gets pulled down, it's going to pull on that quadriceps muscle, okay? Your quadricep muscle has sensory nerve endings inside of it, okay? And those sensory nerve endings are going to detect that stretch. So they are going to send that signal to the spinal cord. And they're going to tell the spinal cord, we need to do something or this muscle is going to tear. So that sensory neuron is then going to synapse, meaning connect to a motor neuron, okay? It does not need to go up to the brain. It's operating by the whole like ask for forgiveness rather than permission situation because it needs to do something quick to prevent that muscle from tearing. So it immediately sends that signal to the motor neuron, which tells the quadricep to contract to prevent that muscle from tearing. Now, eventually it also does send like signals up to the brain to tell it like, hey, just so you know, we did this, right? But your reflex is going to happen independently of conscious input. So the other really cool one that you can see, oh, excuse me. This is a really cool one to test in babies and healthy adults. So healthy adults, it's called the Babinski sign. So if you take like the bottom of a pen, okay, and you run it along somebody's foot in this arc-like pattern, what it does is it causes somebody's toes to curl downwards, right? We evolved this like when we started walking on 2 feet to help us like grip the ground. Now, babies, on the other hand, right? Babies haven't started walking. They don't have this reflex yet. So if you do this arc pattern on a baby's foot, their toes will splay out. And that is perfectly normal. Okay, this reflex, I think, goes away about a year into development. I could be wrong about that, but if you guys want to test this out, you can actually see it on babies, and it doesn't hurt them at all. It tickles their feet. So the other time you'll see this like spreading of toes is in spinal injury in adults. So reflexes are really important because they can tell you a couple different things. They tell you if everything's operating correctly. Okay. Little animation.
Voluntary, predictable response to a stimulus. Reflexes use a neural circuit called a reflex arc, which bypasses regions of the brain where conscious decisions are made. Somatic reflexes involve the contraction of a skeletal muscle after being stimulated by a somatic motor neuron. Patellar reflex is a somatic reflex commonly tested during physical examinations to identify certain diseases. Somatic receptors, located in the skin, a muscle, or a tendon, detect a sensation such as the stretching of the thigh muscle when the patellar tendon is tapped. Afferent, sensory, nerve fibers send a signal directly to the spinal cord. The impulse immediately passes to a motor neuron. It bypasses regions of the brain where conscious decisions are made. The motor neuron initiates an impulse back to the muscle, causing it to contract, producing a slight kick in the lower leg.
Okay. Also, I just realized like my AirPods are connected, so I hope you guys have been able to hear me okay. But let me try and get that set up.
Reflexes.
Yes. Okay, cool. So, autonomic reflexes. Autonomic reflexes are going to affect an organ. So they are also called visceral reflexes, visceral organ, right? Autonomic reflexes are going to involve secretion from glands or contraction of smooth muscles, such as the dilation of the pupil. All right. These reflexes are going to be governed by autonomic neurons. So automatic, right? Autonomic, automatic. Okay. So a good example of this, what's called your baroreceptor reflex. And we're going to talk more about this when we get to, I want to say it's in chapter 12. But now I'm like second guessing myself, but I'm pretty sure it's in chapter 12. Okay. So autonomic receptors, your baroreceptor reflex. Your baroreceptor reflex is going to happen in response to changes in blood pressure. So, for example, you have a bunch of different receptors inside of your arteries that are there to detect blood pressure. If they sense a sudden change in blood pressure, they're going to send that signal to your brainstem, and that brainstem is going to immediately send it down to a motor neuron, which is going to tell your heart you need to contract faster. Okay, because if your blood pressure drops, your heart is going to try and contract faster to push more blood into those arteries. Okay. And vice versa. If your baroreceptors detect a drop, or sorry, an increase in blood pressure, right? They're going to send a signal to decrease the heart rate so that blood stops flowing as quickly, right? So it decreases the volume of blood in the arteries, ideally. Now, obviously, there are disease processes such as like hypertension that can impact this reflex, but so
ANS is responsible for regulating the activities that maintain the steady state of homeostasis. The ANS asserts control through visceral reflexes. All visceral reflexes
Georgia, I
follow
don't see the
similar
video.
steps. To illustrate the process,
oh, hold on. Sometimes what you have to do is like you know when you like switch to like table view, like right now it says file share in those little tabs, and then if I do like a screen share, sometimes you have to like flip over to the screen share tab. Like it says class share for me.
Okay, I did it.
Okay, cool. I'll just rewind it like 10 seconds.
basis. The ANS asserts control through visceral reflexes. All visceral reflexes follow similar steps. To illustrate the process, let's look at the visceral reflex arc responsible for the regulation of blood pressure. The process begins when receptors detect a change in body conditions. In this instance, pressure receptors in the carotid artery, called baroreceptors, detect a change in blood pressure. Afferent neurons transmit information about this change to the central nervous system. The glossopharyngeal nerve relays this information to the medulla oblongata. The brain processes this information and transmits a signal along an efferent nerve. Here, the vagus nerve sends a signal to the heart's pacemaker to slow its rate. The effector organ receives the message and responds. The heart rate slows, and the blood pressure drops.
Okay. So those are visceral reflexes. Okay, next looking at your autonomic nervous system. Okay. Well, now we're going to look at the specific like subdivisions. So I explained reflex arcs to like introduce you to these subdivisions. Now we're going to talk about the specific subdivisions. Okay. Now that is not to say that we are not talking about the peripheral nervous system, right? So again, this is like talking about like, so for example, we're going to end up talking about the sympathetic versus the parasympathetic nervous systems, right? Sympathetic versus parasympathetic is like talking about like Lincoln Park versus Chicago versus Illinois, right? Everything is still part of Illinois. It is not independent of one another. It's just like inside of Illinois or inside of Chicago. Okay. So I still don't know all the Chicago neighborhoods, but I'm learning them. So talking about your autonomic nervous system, okay? Your autonomic nervous system is going to be responsible for regulating activities that maintain homeostasis, right? So we talked about homeostasis all the way back in chapter 1. Okay? So this is going to include secretion of digestive enzyme, constriction and dilation of blood vessels for maintenance of blood pressure, and the secretion of hormones. So automatic activities, things that you don't need to think about. Now they are going to send impulses to cardiac and smooth muscle. So things that occur without conscious awareness or control. Again, it's called the visceral motor system because it targets organs. When we hear visceral, think organ. Now, I included this like summary chart from your book. The only things you really need to know from this, what it innervates, if it's voluntary or involuntary. Do not worry about neurotransmitters. Don't worry about the ganglion. Don't worry about the target cells. Don't worry about excitatory versus inhibitory. None of that. Okay? Just know the difference between somatic versus autonomic, skeletal muscle versus glands, smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, voluntary versus involuntary. Okay? Next, looking at your parasympathetic versus your sympathetic nervous systems. Now, your sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is going to be responsible for preparing the body for activity. Okay? So this is commonly referred to as your fight or flight nervous system. So this is going to be called on in times of stress, anger, or fear. So the example I always use, you run into a bear in the woods, right? You're deciding whether you want to fight that bear or run away. Okay? So one of the first things that happens, right? Your heart starts pounding. So you increase your heart rate, increase your blood pressure. Okay? Dilates pupils. I don't really know if this is the reason why your pupils dilate, but this is the explanation that I always use. So like if you're like deciding where to like run to, if you're going to run away from that bear, right? You need to like see as much as you can. So your pupils dilate to take in as much information as you can. Right? I don't know if that's like the exact reason why, but that's just how I remember if it's dilating or constricting. Okay? It's going to stop salivation. All right. When you go to fight that bear, chances are you are not thinking about what you're having for dinner. Okay. So similarly, it's also going to inhibit digestion. Okay. Now your parasympathetic nervous system, on the other hand, parasympathetic nervous system is referred to as your rest and digest nervous system. It is going to be responsible for calming your body functions. All right. So your parasympathetic nervous system basically is just the opposite of your sympathetic nervous system. Okay. Your parasympathetic nervous system is going to be like what's active when you're like sitting on your couch just eating. Okay. So when you're sitting on your couch just eating, as long as you're not watching like a super scary movie, your heart rate's probably low, your blood pressure is probably low. Just like the sympathetic nervous system dilates your pupil, your parasympathetic is going to constrict it. All right. Like I said, you're just chilling out eating popcorn. So your parasympathetic nervous system promotes salivation. Okay. It's going to stimulate GI motility. Now, bronchoconstriction, we're going to talk about when we get to respiration. For now, don't worry about it. Okay. It is also going to contract your bladder versus relax the bladder, but these are the ones I would focus on. Now, one system is never occurring independently of the other one. Okay. It's always a balance between the two. So this balance between the two is called autonomic tone. It is going to constantly change depending on the body's needs. So for example, right, I just talked about chilling out on the couch, watching a movie. Okay. If that movie has like a jump scare moment, right, your sympathetic nervous system is going to kick up a notch. Okay. You're going to get a little scared. Okay. But your parasympathetic nervous system is still there, still working. So here's just another summary table. If you guys want to see, to help you guys like remember. Okay, like 10 more seconds. Yeah, so your parasympathetic nervous system is going to cause a decrease in heart rate and blood pressure, right? At that moment in time, you are not thinking about fighting that bear, okay? Your sympathetic nervous system, stress. Parasympathetic, opposite of the sympathetic. That's it. Okay, let's do like 10 more seconds. Yeah, great job. So, the sympathetic nervous system, right? Stress, sympathetic stress, SNS. Okay. Decreasing heart rate and stimulating digestion, right? That's going to be that rest and digest system. So that is going to be part of your parasympathetic nervous system. Okay. Fight or flight response. Again, we are talking about your sympathetic nervous system. Okay. It's also going to be part of your, it is not part of your somatic nervous system. Your somatic nervous system has to do with skeletal muscle, right? It is also going to increase alertness and dilate the pupils. Okay. So we're deciding whether or not we want to fight that bear or run from that bear. Ah, why do I keep doing this? Sorry, I am having like a technologically inept day. I don't know what's going on with me. Okay. Now, your body also has something called your enteric nervous system. Your enteric nervous system controls your digestive system. That is all you need to know about it. Okay. Basically, it is separate from your peripheral nervous system, but it's also outside of your brain and spinal cord. Okay. So it's not part of either your peripheral or your central nervous system, but it does have signals coming back and forth from your central nervous system to control that digestive system. Okay. So it's commonly referred to as your gut-brain axis, but controls your digestive system. Okay, let's do like 10 more seconds. Yeah, so everything except for B, right? So, not the autonomic nervous system, true. Cranes, yeah. So, the cranial and spinal nerves are part of both the somatic nervous system as well as the autonomic nervous system because they do control glands as well as skeletal muscles. So, I guess that was kind of like a tricky one. That one seemed to be a point of confusion for you guys.
It's Woodruff. I had to log out and log back in. I wasn't able to answer this question because it was freezing.
That's okay. As if it's only one you missed, you'll be fine. Don't worry about it. There's a
Okay,
bunch
yeah,
of
'cause
MCQs today.
because I need my points.
Yeah, don't worry. Yeah, so autonomic nervous system, automatic functions, right? So heart rate and digestion, automatic functions. Fight or flight response, that is part of your autonomic nervous system. Okay. Parasympathetic division, another division of your autonomic nervous system. Okay, like 10 more seconds. Yeah. So your enteric nervous system, right? That is the body's second nervous system just for the digestive system. That is solely devoted to the digestive system. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and do a 10-minute break. Where is my timer? And then when we come back, we're going to start chapter 12. And then after we do chapter 12 for a bit, I have some in-class activities for you guys. Right. I'll see you guys in 10 minutes. Okay, so just have to upload chapter 12.
Chapter 12, should I just take my own notes because I don't have the packet?
Yeah, I mean, you can type onto like a Google Doc if you want, or not a Google Doc, but like a Word doc if you want to. We're not gonna do like a lot of chapter 12. We'll probably just do like the first page or two. So because like I have like it's not like super long, but it's like a pretty decent in-class activity that I want to give you guys like the last 45 minutes for. So we're only going to do like 20 minutes or so of chapter 12. So if you want to like get the Word doc format, let me show you. I sent out the PDF because someone emailed me and told me that when they tried to download the whatchamacallit, why am I blanking on the word? The packets, Jesus. When they tried to download the packets, like the pictures weren't showing up. So if you go to content, like we are in crazy week 9, right? Pre-class work, your chapter 12 packets right here. Okay. And that'll bring
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah, no worries. So that'll bring you to like a docx file that you can like download and type on. So okay. So chapter 12. And there's a lot of overlap between chapter 11 and chapter 12, you'll see. Okay, let's do like 10 more seconds. Okay. About like half. That's not bad. So we're looking at different parts of the brainstem in this. Okay. So if you remember, you have your midbrain, then you have your pons, which has that big pregnant belly. Then you have your medulla, and then it goes down into your spinal cord, right? And your midbrain has these 2 little dots at the back of it. The pons has like the cerebellum at the back of it. Okay. And then we go straight down. So the reason why I always draw this out, because your midbrain has the two little bumps back here. Not that you need to know specifically this is where auditory and visual reflexes are, but if you're like a visual person, sometimes it's helpful to have like some visual representation of like this significant thing. Okay. So your midbrain is going to control those auditory and visual and auditory reflexes. Okay. A lot of people answered with medulla, which I expected, because your medulla has three important centers that we talk about. So your respiratory center, your vasomotor center, and your cardiac center. Okay. So your medulla has those respiratory, vasomotor, and cardiac centers. Okay. Your pons, on the other hand, okay, the pons just has those tracts. It's going to be responsible for that big pregnant belly, bringing stuff into and out of the cerebellum. So your medulla down here, and then your cerebellum is this guy back here. Okay. So the midbrain, that topmost part, like I said, the midbrain, the only reason I always draw it out, it has those two little bumps at the back there that represent where the visual and auditory reflexes are. Sometimes it's nice to have like a visual representation of like where these specific things are. So, talking about chapter 12, that is like the chapter of sensation, right? So starting with sensory receptors. Sensory receptors are going to be structures specialized at detecting a stimulus. Now, in some cases, they are going to combine with muscles and tissues to form what are called sense organs. So these are organs that are wholly devoted to one thing, right? So something like your eyes, vision, nose, sense of smell, ears, hearing. Okay. Now, a lot of them are going to consist of specialized nerve cells or nerve endings that detect a physical or a chemical event outside of the cell membrane. So if you remember, we talked about the cell membrane all the way back in chapter 3. Okay. That cell membrane is going to be the boundary of the cell. Now, sensation begins when a receptor is going to detect a stimulus. Let me also pull open chapter 12 to make sure I'm getting all of the things you guys need from this. Okay, there we go. So what's going to happen is that receptor is going to detect a stimulus. If the stimulus is strong enough, the receptor is going to cause the sensory neuron to send an impulse to the brain, after which we experience that sensation. Okay. Now the brain is going to filter out most stimuli detected by receptors and keep them below our level of awareness. So the example I always use, hearing, right? So it's really easy to say something and have somebody not hear you say it, right? So I like happens all the time. I'll say something to Kevin, he doesn't hear it. Okay. It's not that I didn't say it. It's not that he didn't like hear it necessarily at a base level. It's that his brain didn't consciously perceive it, right? So, or maybe it's selective hearing, who knows? So the brain filters out most of the stimuli detected by receptors. So it might be picked up on, but it just might not reach that conscious level of perception. Now, sensory receptors are going to transmit information about 3 different things. Okay. First one is going to be type of stimulus. Each sensory receptor is going to only respond to a specific stimulus. So what I mean by that, it's kind of like telling an inside joke. All right. The cold receptors are only going to respond to cold. Okay. Warm receptors are not going to pick up on cold weather. So when you tell an inside joke, right, only the people that know about the inside joke are picking up on that inside joke. If you don't know anything about the inside joke, you don't know what's going on. Okay. So sensory receptors are going to respond to a specific type of stimulus. Next is going to be your location of your stimulus. So each sensory neuron is going to respond to a stimuli in a certain area that is going to be called your receptive field. Now you have sensitive areas like with the fingertips, where you're going to have a ton of different neurons on them. All right. And those neurons are going to have very small receptive fields. I mean, it's like lifeguarding, right? So you have a whole bunch of lifeguards. They all have a very small section of the pool to watch over. Okay. You can actually test this out with something called 2-point discrimination, which is pretty cool. So if you take a pair of tweezers, right, and you put the tips of those tweezers together, okay, repeatedly moving them closer and closer, at a certain point, it's going to feel like a single point. Now on your fingers, right, you need to have really good sensation on your fingers. So on your fingers, this distance is going to be really close between the two, right? Because you have a lot of lifeguards. So each one of them is responsible for a very small area, okay? The tips of the, not the forceps, the tweezers need to be really close together in order to be detected as one point. On your back, on the other hand, okay, you don't have as many lifeguards, all right? So they are monitoring a larger area, which means that the tips of the forceps can be further apart and still be detected as one point. So just a cool, like, little experiment that you can do with a friend to see all this stuff in action. Now, the intensity of the stimulus, okay? The stronger the stimulus, the more nerve fibers are going to fire. So for example, the difference between somebody brushing an eyelash off your cheek or backhanding you, very different sensations, right? Stronger stimulus, more nerve fibers are going to fire. Now, over time, if the same thing is happening over and over, your nerves adjust to it. This is called adaptation. I think I took it out of your guys' packets for this semester, so don't worry too much about that. We have 6 different types of receptors that we want you guys to know, and we will go into detail about all of these, but just to give you guys an overview. First thing, chemoreceptors. So chemoreceptors are going to respond to chemicals. So think about like chemotherapy. Okay, so chemotherapy, chemicals, therapy, chemical therapy, right? So these chemicals can include odors, tastes, and concentration of chemicals such as glucose or carbon dioxide. Mechanoreceptors, on the other hand, mechanoreceptors are going to respond to mechanical stimulation. Okay, so when I say mechanical stimulation, I'm talking like pressure, touch, stretch, and vibration. So the way that I learned about mechanoreceptors, I always think it's a really cool experiment, but at the time it was not very cool. So in my first like neurobiology class, fun fact, freezing cockroaches does not kill them. So what we had to do was take a frozen cockroach out of the freezer, take it over to the lab bench, cut off its leg before it like started running away. Because even cutting off its leg does not kill the cockroach. You can refreeze the cockroach. So like forever traumatized by like the crunch because nobody else at my table would do it. So the reason why I talk about this, cockroaches have these really giant mechanoreceptors on their legs. So they have these like sticky up things, and you can actually stick an electrode on either side of the leg. And when you brush that hair, it sets off an action potential or sets off a nerve impulse. So it's very cool because you can like actually see how the mechanoreceptors are causing that nerve impulse. So mechanoreceptors are going to respond to pressure, stretch, and vibration. So mechanical stimulation. Next, you have thermoreceptors. So think of like thermometer, okay? Thermoreceptors are going to be activated by a change in temperature. So you can have warm receptors or cold receptors. Next, we have what are called nociceptors. Nociceptors are going to be involved in pain. So pain receptors that respond to tissue, they can respond to a couple different things. Tissue damage, sorry. Now, tissue damage can happen from heat, chemicals, pressure, or lack of oxygen, right? So when you like have your hand on that stove, right? That heat can cause those nociceptors to start to fire. Lack of oxygen. If you wrap a string around your finger and cut off circulation to the tips of your fingers over time, it will decrease or it will cause pain to happen, right? Photoreceptors. Photoreceptors are only going to respond to light. They are only found in your eyes. Or sorry, they are going to respond to light and they are only found in your eyes. So think about when you take a picture, right? Take a picture, there's a flash. That flash of light, photoreceptors. Okay? Only found in the eyes. Proprioceptors. Proprioceptors are involved in something called proprioception. Okay? Proprioception is talking about like knowing where you are in space, if that makes sense. So knowing how like your muscles are moving and knowing where your like location is relative to objects, stuff like that. Okay. We'll talk more about that in a minute, but so those are the different types of receptors that we have. This is the same thing. It's just in a table, or sorry, in like a graphic format. So if you guys like these more, it's there for you. Okay, let's do like 10 more seconds. No. Yeah. So sensory receptors detect a stimulus. Okay, let's do like 10 more seconds. Yeah, so if you stub your toe on a coffee table, you're going to activate nociceptors, right? You could also activate mechanoreceptors, but we're talking about pain specifically, right? So we're talking about detecting that pain. So we are talking about nociceptors in this case, all right? Now, there are a couple general senses. Now, general senses, we are talking about like widely distributed sensory endings, okay? Or sensory receptors, right? So they are going to be distributed throughout the skin, the muscles, the tendons, the joints, and the viscera, so meaning the organs. And this is going to include pain, pressure, touch, stretch, and temperature. I don't remember if I like included that or I said that, so make sure I'm following along. Cool. So the first one that we are going to talk about, nociceptors. Okay, so pain. Now, when we talk about pain in this context, we are talking about nociceptive pain, meaning we are talking about something that is coming in and being detected by these nociceptors. Neuropathic pain is something entirely different. Neuropathic pain is due to a damaged nerve. So something like sciatica. Sciatica is due to a damaged nerve. That is a neuropathic pain. Nociceptive pain would be something like burning your hand, stubbing your toe, stuff like that. All right. So nociceptors are going to consist of free nerve endings that carry pain impulses to the brain. All right. These receptors are abundant in skin and mucous membranes, and they are found in almost every organ, right? Because you want to be able to detect when something's wrong and your body wants to tell you, you need to take care of this. So it sends pain signals to tell you, fix this, right? Now, there are two different types of pain fibers. You have fast pain fibers and you have slow pain fibers. Okay. Fast pain fibers are going to be found in the skin and mucous membrane. These are going to produce this sharp, localized stabbing pain at the time of injury. So something like a paper cut. Slow pain fibers, on the other hand, slow pain fibers are going to be found in deeper body organs and structures, and they produce more of like a dull aching pain. So think about it as a stomach ache. Okay, so the difference between a stomach ache and a paper cut. Next, looking at referred pain. Okay. So the way that referred pain happens, basically your body gets its signals crossed. So we talked about in chapter 11, right? We talked about it today, spinal nerves. Okay. Spinal nerves will carry both sensory and motor information, right? But if you look, it is not like a one for one, like one spinal nerve goes to one spot, right? What it is a bunch of neurons come together from different areas and they congregate to form that spinal nerve. So what happens sometimes with referred pain is along that spinal nerve, some organ is damaged. So a really common example of this, the heart, okay? When the heart gets damaged, they say to look for pain in your arm, right? So pain in that left arm. Because your heart and the signals from the surface of your arm are traveling along the same spinal nerve. So when the heart sends off that signal that, hey, I'm in pain, okay, it's going to congregate with that area of your arm, the signals from the area of the arm. It is not that that area of the arm is losing blood circulation or damaged in some way, shape, or form. What it is that the heart is sending the signal, I am in pain, and the body is interpreting that as being from that region on the arm. Okay. So what happens is the sensory impulses from both areas are going to travel over the same pathway, and the brain can misidentify pain from one area as coming from another area. Okay. So I believe the thing is from another body's on the body's surface. Okay. Okay, let's do 10 more seconds. Yeah. So we have two types of pain fibers, right? We have fast pain fibers and slow pain fibers. Okay, next looking at touch and pressure. I do not expect you guys to memorize all of these different mechanoreceptors. The point is that there are a bunch of different ones and they're all found in your skin. Well, not all found in your skin, but so mechanoreceptors are going to provide, it keeps freezing. The letters are back. Okay. I wonder what's going on. Because like I haven't moved my like internet box at all. So I'm not sure.
It's back on page 1 now.
Well, I just like cut it out and then turn it back on so that way like the letters go away for you guys at least. But we're only gonna do a couple more slides. So hopefully, I don't know, like maybe the planets are misaligned or whatever I don't know, the zodiac stuff. I don't know anything about that stuff, but I don't know. Occasionally my mother-in-law will be like, Mercury's in retrograde and all of your electronics are gonna go crazy. So
Yeah, maybe that's what's going on because this is the third time I had to close and open.
I'm sorry. I'm doing my best. Yeah. So mechanoreceptors are going to provide the sensation of touch. Okay. You're going to see a lot of these receptors in sensitive areas of your skin. So including like your fingertips, your palms, your lips, and your eyelids. Okay. Now, for receptors for deep touch and pressure, it makes sense that they are deeper in your body. So in that subcutaneous tissue, right? Touch is a very important sense. It starts to develop at about 8 weeks old. And then after birth, you need to make sure that you keep holding the babies. Okay. So it's like why you can like tap on your stomach and like the babies will kick back, right? Because they can feel it very early on. There was a couple experiments done during the Holocaust, actually, where there was like this guy that was experimenting on Jewish babies, and he told the nurses like, don't feed them or don't touch them when we feed them, right? So like they get like the nasal tubes to feed, and the babies like literally like started crawling at themselves, and like it was very sad. Another like case of this, like there was a Romanian orphanage where they were just like so overwhelmed that they didn't pay attention to these kids like right after World War I. So a lot of these kids ended up growing up with intellectual disabilities because like they didn't have that touch interaction. So physical touch, super important. And just hold the babies, they're really cute. And so next we have thermoreceptors. So like we said, thermoreceptors are going to respond to temperature changes, right? So you have warm receptors, which are going to respond to warmer temperatures. These are going to be located in your dermis. Now, I do not expect you guys to memorize the exact numbers for the ranges. I just want you to know warm receptors are associated with warm, and they are located in the dermis. Okay? Once you get above a certain point, so like above about 118 degrees Fahrenheit, you're going to get a burning sensation. Cold receptors, on the other hand, cold receptors are going to be found deep in the epidermis. Okay? They're going to be active between 68 to 86 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, once you get down below 50, at first it's going to act like an anesthetic, meaning it is going to numb. Okay? And then eventually it's going to start triggering that freezing pain. Okay? So warm response to warm, cold response to cold. Proprioception. So proprioception is going to be the sense of orientation or position in space, like I said. So it's understanding where you are in space. So you're going to find these receptors in skeletal muscles, joints, tendons, and they're going to provide the information about body movement, muscle stretch, and general orientation. Okay. You're also going to find some proprioceptors located in your inner ear where they're going to play a role in balance. I don't know why I've always thought of proprioception as like being related to yoga, but I have. So I feel like it's very like closely intertwined. Okay. Okay, let's do like 10 more seconds. Yeah, so the true source of pain can be difficult to identify because sensory impulses from different areas often travel to the brain over the same pathway. Okay. So that's where we'll leave off for today, because I feel like that's a good stopping point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to email you guys now the in-class activity. I'm going to split you guys into tables. When you guys go to submit the in-class activity, okay, just email it back to me. Because what I found last time happened when I had you guys submit it on Brightspace, a lot of people submitted, like, they submitted documents that I couldn't open. And like, if I can't open it, I can't see who's on it. So like, I don't want to penalize people for not submitting an in-class activity that they thought that their partner submitted that, like, just, you know what I mean? Like, that I couldn't open. So I didn't include it as participation for the last one. I will be including it today. Please make sure you submit it. Okay. It's just, I didn't want to like penalize you because like your partner couldn't submit it. You know what I mean? So keep that in mind. So I'm just going to have you guys email it to me. All right. And I'm going to type this all out in the instructions. Let me pull it up. So same thing as always, you guys can work at your tables. You can, if nobody at tables contributing, you are welcome to work individually. You can move tables to work with whoever you want. But yeah, and I'm here to answer questions. I'm just gonna mute myself so I don't bother you guys, but I can answer questions in chat, raise your hand, whatever you gotta do.
How do we do the case study for part 6? Am I just like reading the like case scenario and then filling in the part at the bottom? Okay. Okay, thank you.
Just so you guys know, please don't leave after you finish the in-class activity. I'm starting to get them sent to me, which is great. I just like if you guys leave early, and it falls under that like 20-minute grace period, I don't want you guys to do that. So just stay logged in for the rest of class. It should be about like 10 more minutes. Okay. So I guess this is like your 10-minute morning as well. So if you are working in a group and you haven't exchanged contact information, now would be a good time to do that.
Yes, I was saying, do we still get a chance to turn it in if we don't finish it by the end of class? Okay, yeah, because it's because I'm not complete. I'm almost done though.
Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and end class. It looks like those of you that were like sending out your contact information, were able to do that. If not, just shoot a message in chat now so that I don't end class prematurely. But otherwise, you guys are all set for the night. And I will see you on Monday. If you guys are doing the remediation exam is like is 3 p.m. Okay, 3 p.m. In the room that we normally take our exams. Juanita.
We're not finished yet. So should we continue to finish or just send you what we got?
You guys can finish it up on your own. So like send each other like your emails if you want to keep working on it together. Okay. I'm getting a lot of messages to not end yet. So I'll leave the class open for you guys.
So but I mean, eventually class is going to be over and we may not be done. We could just get done and then email it to you. You're not timing us like on the time we're going to email you, right?
No. Yeah, just send it to me like by midnight. But like you guys are kind of late. So honestly, like if you guys want to send it to me tomorrow by midnight, that works too.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right, good night.
Good night. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and end class. It looks like those of you that were still moving around information got a chance to hopefully. But I gotta like get set up for my next class. So I will see you guys on Monday. Again, you guys can turn in the in-class assignment up to like tomorrow night, midnight, because I don't want you guys to like not be paying attention in your next class. But that way you have a little extra time to work on it. So have a good night, or good rest of your night, guys.